20 years ago. Wei Ga, look, I got a firefly. 7-year-old Shen Huan cupped his small hands carefully, his round face glowing with delight as golden light flickered between his fingers. In the gathering dusk beside Lotus Village's central pond, he looked like a little spirit himself, all bright eyes and infectious laughter. Wei Liang, a year older and infinitely more serious, sat cross-legged on the wooden dock they'd claimed as their secret hideout. Don't hold it too tight, Huan. You'll hurt it. I know. Huan settled beside his best friend, opening his hands to let the firefly escape. They watched it spiral upward to join the dozens of others dancing over the lotus blossoms. Wei Ga, do you think we'll always be together like this? It was the kind of question that made Wei Liang's chest feel warm and tight. Huan always asked things like this, serious things disguised as simple curiosity. At 8, Wei Liang already understood that his friend saw the world differently, felt everything more deeply. Of course we will. We're brothers, aren't we? Not by blood, but by choice. Huan beamed and rolled up his sleeve, revealing the small lotus-shaped birthmark on his left shoulder. Brothers by the mark of the lotus, he declared solemnly, and giggled at his own formality. Wei Liang had always loved that birthmark. It was perfectly shaped, like someone had pressed a tiny lotus blossom into Huan's skin when he was born. He traced it with one finger, making Huan squirm and laugh. Promise me something, Wei Ga. Anything. Promise that even if we get separated, even if the whole world changes, we'll find each other again. Promise. We'll always be brave together and strong together, and we'll protect each other no matter what. Wei Liang looked into those earnest, dark eyes and felt something shift in his chest, a certainty that this boy would always be the most important person in his world. I promise, Huan, no matter how long it takes, no matter how far apart we are, I'll find you. We'll always find each other. They pressed their foreheads together in the way children do when making sacred vows, and Wei Liang thought he could feel Huan's heartbeat matching his own. Neither boy knew that death was already riding toward Lotus Village, dressed in the robes of a respected sect with imperial backing. Neither could imagine that in 3 days, everything they loved would be ash, and their childhood promise would become the only thing standing between them and despair. But promises made beside lotus ponds under firefly light have a power all their own. Even when everything else burns, some vows endure. The massacre, 3 days later. The Crimson Blade sect came at dawn, when the mist still clung to the lotus pond and most of the village was just beginning to stir. They wore pristine white robes marked with red sword emblems, and their leader spoke of imperial mandates and spiritual corruption. This land has been claimed by powers beyond your understanding, he announced to the hastily gathered villagers. Your presence here interferes with matters of cultivation that concern the stability of the realm itself. You'll relocate immediately. Wei Liang's father, the village's de facto leader, stepped forward with the quiet dignity that had always made his son proud. Honored masters, we've lived on this land for 5 generations. Our ancestors are buried here. Surely there's been some mistake. The sword took his head before he could finish the sentence. What followed was not a battle, but a slaughter. The Crimson Blade sect had come not to negotiate, but to eliminate witnesses to whatever they planned for the village. Men, women, children, it didn't matter. They cut down everyone they could find with the efficient brutality of people who'd done this before. Wei Liang and Huan huddled in the secret hollow beneath their dock, holding each other as the screams echoed across the water. They'd hidden there countless times during games of hide-and-seek, but this was different. This was real terror, the kind that aged children into adults in a single morning. Don't look, Wei Liang whispered, covering Huan's eyes as bodies floated past their hiding spot. But Huan was already looking, already watching his world burn, already changing into something harder and colder than the gentle boy who'd cut fireflies just 3 nights before. When the killing was finally over, when the Crimson Blade sect had ridden away satisfied with their thoroughness, 2 other sect masters arrived to survey the devastation. They moved through the wreckage like scavengers, cataloging the dead and searching for anything of value. That's when they found the boys. This one's injured but alive. called the master in flowing blue robes, pulling Wei Liang from the hollow. "Strong cultivation potential. He could be useful." "And this one," said the master in black, lifting a traumatized Huan with surprising gentleness. "Excellent bone structure for ice cultivation. Rare bloodline. Yes, he'll do nicely." They were separated before either boy could protest, loaded onto different carts heading in different directions. The last thing Wei Liang saw of his best friend was Huan's tear-stained face looking back at him over the cart to wooden rail, lips moving silently around words that looked like "I promise." The last thing Huan saw of Wei Liang was his outstretched hand reaching across an ever-widening distance, trying to bridge a gap that would take 20 years to close. Neither boy knew that their rescue was as calculated as the massacre itself. Neither understood that the very sect masters who saved them had orchestrated the attack on Lotus Village to acquire children with specific bloodlines for their own purposes. All they knew was loss and the promises they'd made beside a pond that no longer existed. But promises forged in firefly light and tempered by blood are stronger than the schemes of men who mistake cruelty for wisdom. 20 years would pass. The boys would grow into men, shaped by different forms of training, different philosophies, different kinds of pain. But the Lotus Mark would remain, and so would the promise. Chapter 1. The morning mist clung to Willow Creek Village like a shroud, but it couldn't hide the smell of death. Wei Liang knelt beside the fourth body they'd found this week, another young man, drained pale as winter silk, with that same expression of terror frozen on his face. The village elder wrung his hands behind him, muttering prayers to ancestors who seemed to have abandoned this cursed place. "Master Wei, surely the spirits have marked us for punishment. First the crops withered, then the animals fled, and now this." Wei Liang's fingers traced the victim's neck, finding puncture wounds so precise they could have been made by ice needles. He stood, brushing dirt from his sky blue robes. At 27, he'd seen enough darkness masquerading as mystery to know the difference. But who would do such evil, and why our humble village? Before Wei Liang could answer, a young woman burst through the crowd that had gathered. "Elder! Elder Chen!" she gasped, clutching her side. The stranger, the one who came yesterday asking questions about the deaths. He's returned." Wei Liang's pulse quickened. "What stranger?" "A young master dressed in black like a winter storm. Cold eyes, colder voice. He carried a sword that gleamed like frozen starlight. When he spoke to me yesterday, it felt like ice water in my veins. But his questions, they were the same ones you've been asking, Master Wei." "Someone else is investigating." The thought sent an unexpected thrill through Wei Liang's chest. In all his years of wandering the martial world, solving mysteries that others called supernatural, he'd worked alone. The idea that another seeker of truth walked this same dark path made him feel less isolated. Where did he go? The Crimson Phoenix Inn. But Master Wei, there's something strange. The innkeeper said he paid for a month's stay, but he barely touches his food, and at night, they hear sword practice in his room. Not normal forms, but something desperate, violent. Wei Liang was already moving toward the end, his mind racing. Another investigator with a month's timeline suggested someone who knew this case would require deep digging. The violent midnight sword practice spoke to inner turmoil, perhaps even guilt. Was he tracking a fellow seeker of justice, or the killer himself?
The Crimson Phoenix Inn sat at Willow Creek's heart like a jewel among stones. 3 stories of polished wood and red-painted beams, with paper lanterns swaying gently in the morning breeze. Wei Liang approached the innkeeper, a plump woman whose usual cheerful demeanor seemed strained. "The stranger in black," he said without preamble. "I need to know about him." Her eyes darted nervously. "Are you with the authorities, young master? Because if you are, I swear on my ancestors' graves I've done nothing wrong by housing him. He pays well and keeps to himself." "I'm investigating the deaths, the same case he's working." Wei Liang softened his voice, letting his natural warmth show through. "I'm not here to cause trouble for you or him. I just need to understand who else is seeking answers." The innkeeper relaxed slightly. "He arrived 3 days ago, just after the 3rd body was found. Tall, elegant, moves like a blade through silk. But his eyes?" She shivered. I've served cultivators before, Master Wei, seen men who've killed and men who've suffered. This one has them both, and it's eating him alive. Has he asked about the same things I have? The pattern of deaths, the timing, any connections between victims? Exactly the same questions. But while you ask with kindness, hoping to heal this village's pain, he asks like a man preparing for war. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. Last night, I heard him talking to himself. Just one word. Repeat it like a mantra. Promise. Wei Liang's breath caught. A promise. What kind of vow could drive a man to such desperate investigation? What oath could burn cold enough to freeze a person's humanity, while still compelling them towards justice? Is he here now? Left before dawn, but he'll return. He always does, just as the sun sets. Sits by his window, staring at the village like he's memorizing every detail. Wei Liang spent the day continuing his investigation, but his thoughts kept drifting to the mysterious stranger. By evening, he found himself stationed across from the inn, watching the second-floor window that glowed with soft candlelight. Just as the innkeeper had said, a figure in black appeared at the window. Tall, still, gazing down at the village with an intensity that made Wei Liang's chest tighten. Even from this distance, something about the stranger's silhouette tugged at a memory he couldn't quite reach. The set of his shoulders, perhaps, or the way he held his head. Wei Liang had excellent recall, a necessity in his line of work, but this felt deeper than recent memory. Older, more fundamental. Childhood memories are unreliable, he reminded himself. Everyone thinks strangers look familiar sometimes. But as he watched the figure at the window, Wei Liang couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. Chapter 2. 2 weeks later, the mystery had only deepened. Wei Liang had found the connection between victims, all young men between 16 and 25, all skilled in martial arts, all bearing the specific birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on their left shoulder. The killer was selecting them deliberately, but the motive remained hidden. Meanwhile, his glimpses of the black-clad stranger had become more frequent, but no less mysterious. The man moved through the village like a shadow with purpose, always one step ahead in the investigation, always just out of conversational reach. Twice, Wei Liang had arrived at crime scenes to find evidence of another's presence, a footprint in the mud or a broken twig positioned too precisely to be natural. They were circling the same truth from different angles, like two moths drawn to the same flame. Then the announcement came. The Golden Lotus martial arts tournament, hosted by the prestigious Azure Mountain sect, was accepting final registrations. The tournament's location less than a day's ride from Willow Creek Village, and the timing felt like more coincidence. Wei Liang's instinct screamed that the killer would be drawn to such a gathering. Hundreds of young martial artists in one place, many bearing the birthmarks that seemed to fascinate their murderer. If he was going to catch this monster, the tournament was his best chance. What he didn't expect was to find himself facing the stranger in black across the final arena. The Azure Mountain sect had spared no expense. The tournament ground was a masterpiece of marble and jade, surrounded by ascending terraces packed with spectators. Silk banners in azure and doiled snapped in the mountain wind, while the scent of incense and expensive tea created an atmosphere of refined violence. Wei Liang had found his way to preliminary rounds with his signature style, graceful but devastating, like water that could both heal and destroy. His opponents had fallen to techniques passed down through the flowing river sect, each movement as natural as breathing. But it was in the semi-final that he first saw his mysterious stranger fight. The man moved like winter itself, precise, lethal, beautiful in its inevitability. His swordwork was unlike anything Wei Liang had ever seen. Each strike seemed to freeze the air around it, leaving trails of crystalline energy that made spectators gasp in wonder and terror. Northern Isaac techniques? Wei Liang realized with the start. He read about them in ancient texts, but never seen them performed. The Northern Isaac had been destroyed 15 years ago in a massacre that shocked the martial world. How had this stranger learned these forbidden arts? More disturbing was how familiar the stranger's movements felt. Not the techniques themselves, those were foreign and deadly, but the rhythm beneath them.
The way he pivoted on his left foot, the slight hesitation before his finishing strikes, the unconscious habit of adjusting his sleeve after each form. I know those habits, Wei Liang thought, his heart beginning to race, but that's impossible. Now they sit in the final arena as the sun reached its zenith, casting sharp shadows across the marble ground. The stranger had removed his outer cloak, revealing a form-fitting black robe that accentuated his lethal grace. His face was angular and pale, with eyes like chips of winter sky. Beautiful in the way that blizzards were beautiful, something to admire from a safe distance. Competitors, present your weapons. Wei Liang drew his sword, a blade of silver-white steel, inscribed with flowing water patterns, warm to the touch despite the mountain air. Across from him, the stranger unsheathed a sword that seemed to drink in the sunlight, leaving a trail of mist that sparkled like trapped starlight. Begin. They moved simultaneously, meeting in the center of the arena with a clash that sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Wei Liang's water-style techniques flowed around the opponent's ice-hard defenses, while the stranger's counterattacks came like the killing frost of the winter's heart. He's stronger than me, Wei Liang realized after the first exchange, and faster. But there's something held back in his attacks, as if he's fighting two battles, one against me and another against himself. They danced across the arena, neither able to gain decisive advantage. Wei Liang had never faced an opponent who challenged him so completely. Every technique he had mastered, every strategy he had developed, met his perfect counter in this stranger's impossible skill. But more than that, fighting him felt like coming home, like rediscovering a lost part of himself he never knew was missing. Focus, he commanded himself. This is just a tournament. Don't let romantic fantasies cloud your judgment. But as they engaged in a particularly intense exchange, Wei Liang saw his open. The stranger had committed to a devastating overhead strike that would end the match if it connected. In desperation, Wei Liang lunged forward into his opponent's guard, grabbing the stranger's left sleeve to throw him off balance. The fabric tore. Time stopped. There, revealed on the stranger's left shoulder by the torn black silk, was a birthmark. Not the crescent moon that marked the killer's victims, but something else. Something that made the Wei Liang's world tilt on its axis. A blossom. A lotus blossom, small and perfect, exactly like the one he used to trace with its finger when they were children, sitting by the pond, promising each other they'd be the best friends forever. The stranger's sword froze, his winter-pale eyes going wide with the same recognition that was searing through Wei Liang's chest. Ah Huan, Wei Liang whispered, using the childhood nickname he hadn't spoken in 20 years. The arena fell silent. 10,000 spectators held their breath as two men stood frozen in the center of the marble ring, lost in a moment that belonged to their shared past. The stranger, Shen Wan, it's really Shen Wan, stared at him with something between wonder and agony. His perfect composure cracked, revealing the boy that Wei Liang had lost so long ago, hidden between 20 years of carefully constructed ice. Wei Ji, Han breathed, the childhood endearment falling from his lips like a prayer. And then the moment shattered.
Chapter 3. Shen Huang's mask snapped back into place so quickly it made Wei Liang dizzy. The warmth in those pale eyes vanished, replaced by the familiar winter frost that had marked the stranger's every appearance in Willow Creek Village. This match is a draw, Shen Huang announced to the confused crowd, sheathing his sword in one fluid motion. I forfeit my claim to victory. Wait! Wei Liang lunged forward, but Shen Huang was already moving, vaulting from the arena with inhuman grace. Huan, please! But his childhood friend disappeared into the crowd like smoke, leaving Wei Liang standing alone in the center of the arena as 10,000 spectators erupted in confusion and disappointment. The tournament officials declared Wei Liang the winner by default, pressing a jade token worth a fortune into his hands along with congratulations he barely heard. All he could think about was chasing after the boy he'd mourned for 20 years, the friend he'd never stopped hoping might still be alive. He found Shen Huang at the tournament's edge, where the carefully maintained grounds gave way to wild mountain forest. His friend, alive, here, real, stood with his back turned, black robes flowing in the wind like a dark flame.
Huan, please, don't run from me again. The child died in the massacre. Shan Huang's voice was steady, controlled, empty of all emotion. We are strangers now, Master Wei. Whatever you think you remember, whatever connection you believe exists between us, you're mistaken. Wei Liang stepped closer, his heart breaking at the formal address. You know that's not true. The lotus mark is irrelevant. He turned, and the coldness in his eyes was like a physical blow. People change, Wei Liang. The boy you knew was weak, naive, full of impossible dreams. He died with our families. What stands before you now is something else entirely. I don't believe that. Wei Liang reached out, desperate to bridge the 20-year chasm between them. I see you, Huang. Beneath all that ice, you're still what? Huang's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Still the child who made grand promises about becoming heroes together? Still naive enough to believe in justice and happy endings? His hand moved to his sword hilt, and Wei Liang noticed a slight tremor in his fingers, the only crack in his perfect control. Look around you, Wei Ge. Where is the justice for our families? Where are the happy endings for the children who watched their parents burn? The childhood endearment, spoken with such pain, nearly broke Wei Liang's composure. I never stopped looking for you. Never stopped hoping. Hope is a luxury for those who haven't learned the world's true nature. Huan stepped back, increasing the distance between them. I have work to do, people to find, debts to collect. If you're wise, you'll return to your comfortable life and forget this meeting ever happened. The investigation. Understanding crashed over Wei Liang. The deaths in Willow Creek Village, you're not solving them, are you? You're using them, following the killer's trail for your own purposes? Something flickered in Huang's eyes. You were always too clever for your own good. Tell me the truth, Huang. Are you still trying to fulfill our promise? Are you hunting the people responsible for the massacre? For a moment, just a moment, the ice in Huang's expression melted. Wei Liang saw 20 years of pain, rage, and devastating loneliness. Saw the boy who'd been his entire world, twisted by trauma into something beautiful and terrible. Then the mask returned. My business is my own. Stay away from me, Wei Liang, for both our sakes. But as Huang turned to leave, Wei Liang called after him. I remember what you said that last night, before the sect master separated us. Do you? Huang's steps faltered. You said you'd rather die than forget me. You made me promise that no matter how long it took, no matter how far apart we were, we'd find each other again. Wei Liang's voice broke. I kept that promise, Huang. I never stopped looking, and now that I found you, I'm not letting you disappear again. Huang stood frozen for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Some promises are too dangerous to keep. Then he was gone, vanishing into the forest shadows like he never existed at all. Wei Liang sank to his knees on the mountain path, overwhelmed by 20 years of grief, finally given a focus. Huan was alive, changed, damaged, possibly dangerous, but alive. And Wei Liang was going to save him, whether Huang wanted to be saved or not. Chapter 4. Wei Liang returned to Willow Creek Village with a heart full of purpose and dread. Huang was connected to the killing somehow, not as their perpetrator, he was certain, but as someone tracking the true murderer. The question was whether he saw justice or revenge, and in Wei Liang's experience, that distinction often meant the difference between salvation and damnation. He threw himself into the investigation with renewed intensity, but now every clue felt personal. Each victim bore the crescent moon birthmark, but what connected them to Huang's past? Why would their killer's trail intersect with his quest for vengeance? The answer came from an unexpected source, Elder Chen's private records. I'm sorry, Master Wei. I should have shown you these earlier, but they concern delicate matters, secrets that go back generations. Inside the chest were documents dating back 60 years, written in the careful script of Chen's grandfather, marriage records, birth certificates, genealogy charts, and maps.
Maps? Of Lotus Village. Lotus Village? Wei Liang's blood ran cold. He'd heard that name before, whispered in conversations his master thought he wasn't listening to. Elder Chen, what happened to Lotus Village? The elder man's face grew grave. Massacred. 20 years ago, every soul, from the eldest grandfather to the newest baby. The few survivors scattered to the winds, took new names, tried to forget. Wei Liang studied the genealogy charts with growing understanding and horror. The crescent moon birthmark wasn't random. It was hereditary, passed down through specific bloodlines that originated in Lotus Village. The victims weren't being chosen for their martial skills or their ages. They were being hunted for their ancestry. These families, he pointed to names on the chart, they're all descendants from Lotus Village survivors. The children who escaped, yes, adopted into other communities, raised under new identities for their protection. Elder Chen's voice shook, but somehow, someone has been tracking them down. Someone who knows the old bloodlines. Someone who was there during the massacre. Wei Liang felt the pieces clicking into place like a lock opening. Elder Chen, I need to know everything about the Lotus Village massacre, not the official story, the truth. The elder's weathered hands trembled as he pulled out a final document from the chest bottom. My grandfather was one of the first responders that day. What he found, it haunts our family still. The paper was yellow with age, covered with his grandfather's shaking handwriting. The Crimson Blade sect claims imperial mandate, but their interest in the Lotus Pond suggests other motives. The water runs red, but not just with blood. Spiritual energy concentrates here unnaturally. They're building something below the village, a cultivation array that requires specific bloodline sacrifices. The children they rescued were selected deliberately. Heaven help us, I think they plan to complete the ritual. Blood turned into ice. The children they rescued. Elder Chen, how many survivors were there? Official records say none. But my grandfather mentioned 2 boys, taken by different sects. One went north, one went south. Both had the hereditary marks. One lotus, one crescent. Huang has the lotus. I have. He rolled up his own sleeve, revealing the crescent moon birthmark he had barely thought about in years. His master had always told him it was just a coincidence, a quirk of birth. But now, we're not just survivors, are we? We're the final pieces of their ritual. That night, Wei Liang sat by his window, staring out at the village as pieces of a decades-long conspiracy fell into place. The Crimson Blade sect had orchestrated the massacre to harvest spiritual energy from bloodline sacrifices. But something had gone wrong. Maybe the ritual was incomplete. Maybe they needed the survivors to return voluntarily. Now someone was hunting down the scattered descendants, trying to finish what was started 20 years ago. And Huang, cold, dangerous, beautiful Huang, was walking directly into their trap. A soft knock at his door interrupted his brooding. Wei Liang opened it to find a figure in black standing in the hallway, hood drawn in against recognition. May I come in? Huang's voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the exhaustion beneath it. Always. Wei Liang stepped aside, his heart racing. You came back. Huang entered the small room but remained standing by the window, maintaining distance even in the intimate space. I shouldn't be here. This complicates everything.
What complicates everything? Your investigation? Your quest for revenge? Wei Liang moved closer, desperate to bridge the gap between them. Huan, I know about Lotus Village. I know about the bloodlines, the ritual. You know nothing. But Huan's protests lacked conviction. In the candlelight, Wei Liang could see the exhaustion lining his face, the weight of 20 years carried alone. I know you've been hunting the people responsible for the massacre. I know that current murders are connected to what happened to us. Wei Liang reached out slowly, telegraphing his intentions. I know you're in danger. Huan didn't pull away when Wei Liang's fingers brushed his cheek, but he closed his eyes as if the gentle touch caused him pain. You don't understand what I become, Wiji. The things I've done in pursuit of justice. Tell me. I've killed 17 people in the last 5 years. Juan's voice was barely a whisper. All connected to the Crimson Blade sect, all complicit in massacres like ours. I've tortured information from men who beg for mercy. I've burned entire compounds to the ground with everyone inside. Wei Liang's hand didn't move from Juan's cheek. Did they deserve it? A bitter laugh. Does it matter? I've become the monster they created when they took everything from us. No. Wei Liang stepped closer, close enough to feel Juan's breath on his skin. You've become a weapon pointed at evil. That's not the same thing. Juan's eyes opened, searching Wei Liang's face for judgment and finding only understanding. How can you look at me like that after everything I've told you? Because I see you, Juan, not the legend or the killer or the cult stranger. I see the boy who caught fireflies and made promises by the lotus pond. I see my best friend who's been carrying this burden alone for 20 years. Something cracked in Juan's composure. His carefully constructed walls wavered, revealing glimpses of the pain and loneliness he'd been hiding. I never forgot you, he whispered. Every night, I remembered our promise. But I thought if I found you again, if you saw what I'd become, you'd be horrified, disgusted. I thought it was better to let you remember the child I was rather than face the man I am. You're an idiot. Wei Liang smiled through tears he hadn't realized were falling. Did you really think a little blood on your hands would scare me away? Juan, I've been looking for you for 20 years. Nothing could make me stop loving you now. The word hung between them, like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Love. Not the innocent affection of children, but the deep, desperate love of adults who'd found their missing piece after decades of searching. Juan's control finally shattered. He collapsed against Wei Liang. 20 years of grief and loneliness pouring out in silent sobs that shook his entire frame. Wei Liang held him, stroking his hair, whispering the childhood endearments that had lived in his heart, unchanged through all the years between. I have to finish this, Juan said when he could speak again. The people responsible for Lotus Village, for all the other massacres, they're still out there, still killing. And now they're hunting the survivors to complete the original ritual. Then we'll finish it together. Wei Liang pulled back to look into Juan's eyes. Like we promised when we were children. Brave together, strong together. Wei Ji, you don't understand. The ritual they're planning, it requires the willing sacrifice of bloodline survivors. They're not trying to kill us. They're trying to make us choose to die. What could possibly make us choose that? Huang's expression grew haunted. They're going to take everything we care about, everyone we love, and they're going to keep taking until death seems mercy. Wei Liang felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. They're not just hunting random descendants, are they? They're targeting people connected to us specifically. The innkeeper's daughter has the crescent moon mark. So does the blacksmith's son and the herb seller's grandson. Juan's voice was hollow with realization. They're not killing them yet because they want us to form attachments first. Want us to care about this village so that when they threaten it, we'll trade our lives for theirs. Wei Liang sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the trap closing around them. How long do we have? Based on the pattern, maybe a week before they make their move. But Wei Ji, Juan knelt before his chair, taking his hands. There's might be another way. My master, the one who took me after the massacre, he's been researching the ritual for 20 years. He thinks there's a way to turn their own power against them. Your master was part of this? No, he generally saved me, trained me, loved me like a son. But he knew what the Crimson Blade sect was planning, knew they'd come for us eventually. Everything he taught me, every technique, every piece of knowledge, it was all preparation for this moment. Wei Liang studied Juan's face, seeing hope and determination replacing the despair that had lived there for so long. What kind of way? The ritual requires willing sacrifice,
But it also requires the subjects to die separately, their blood mixed in a specific pattern. If we can stay together, if we can synchronize our spiritual energy instead of fighting alone, we can overload their array, turn it into a weapon instead of a tool. Exactly. But Wei Ji, Juan's grip tightened on his hands. It's still incredibly dangerous. Even if we succeed, there's a good chance neither of us will survive. Wei Liang was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the children in the village, the families that had already lost so much, and the cycle of violence that would continue unless someone stopped it here and now. Juan, do you remember what you said that last night before they separated us? I said I'd rather die than forget you. And I said I'd rather die than live without you. Wei Liang smiled through tears he hadn't realized were falling. Looks like we're about to find out if we meant it. Juan stared at him for a moment and then began to laugh. Not the bitter sound he'd made before, but something genuine and warm and achingly familiar. You know what's the worst part is? After all these years of being apart, we only get a week together before possibly dying again. Then we'd better make it count. Wei Liang leaned forward, closing the last distance between them. Starting now. When their lips met, it was like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. 20 years of separation, of longing, of growing into different people, while never forgetting what they'd been to each other, all of it crystallized into a single perfect moment of connection. They kissed like drowning men finding air, like lost travelers finally seeing familiar stars. Desperate and gentle, and absolutely certain that whatever came next, they face it as they always meant to, together. Chapter 5. Dawn brought visitors to Willow Creek Village. Wei Liang woke to the sounds of horses and voices. Too many voices, too organized to be merchants or travelers. He'd spent the night in Juan's arms, learning the map of scars across his beloved's body, memorizing the way Juan whispered his name like a prayer. Now, he dressed quickly, checking his sword as Juan did the same with deadly efficiency. "They're early," he said, moving to the window. Below, a procession of white-robed figures had entered the village square. At their head rode a man Wei Liang recognized from wanted posters. Sect leader Zhao Ming of the Crimson Blade sect, wanted for questioning in connection with 17 village massacres over the past 2 decades. He looked exactly as he did 20 years ago. Not a day older, not a trace of aging on his pale, handsome face. The kind of unnatural preservation that spoke to dark cultivation practices and stolen life force. "Honored villagers," Zhao Ming's voice carried clearly in the morning air. "I bring greetings from the imperial court and news of great importance to your community." Elder Chen emerged from his home, flanked by other village leaders. From their window, Wei Liang could see the old man's hands shaking. Whether from age or recognition, he couldn't tell. "We welcome you, Psych Leader, though your arrival is unexpected." "Ah, but necessary. You see, this village sits upon land of great spiritual significance. Ancient texts have not recently come to light, revealing that a sacred ritual must be performed here to prevent unfortunate consequences for the entire region." Lies wrapped in official language, Wei Liang thought. The same script they used 20 years ago. "What kind of ritual?" Elder Chen asked, though his voice suggested he feared the answer. "One that requires the voluntary participation of specific bloodline descendants. Fortunately, our research indicates that 2 such individuals are currently residing in your village. Masters Wei Liang and Sheng Huan, heroes of the Golden Lotus Tournament. Such distinguished guests you have." Juan's hand found Wei Liang's shoulder. "He knows we're here, knows we're together." "Of course he does. He's been orchestrating this from the beginning."
Below, Zhao Ming continued his performance. The ritual is simple, really. These 2 young masters need only offer a small portion of their spiritual energy to consecrate the sacred ground. A minor inconvenience for such powerful cultivators, and one that will ensure prosperity for your village for generations to come. "And if they refuse?" Elder Chan's voice carried clearly in the morning stillness. Zhao Ming's smile widened. "Oh, but why would they refuse, when the alternative is so unpleasant for everyone involved?" At his signal, more sect members emerged from the forest surrounding the village. Hundreds of them, all armed, all positioned to cut off any escape route. They'd surrounded Willow Creek Village as thoroughly as they'd once surrounded Lotus Village. You see, Zhao Ming continued conversationally, the spiritual imbalance caused by the unconsecrated ground grows worse each day. If not corrected soon, I fear terrible accidents might befall the local population. Plague, perhaps, or bandits, or simply the kind of unfortunate violence that sometimes claims entire communities. The threat was clear enough to terrify, vague enough to maintain plausible deniability. "Wiga," Huan whispered. "We need to get down there before he escalates." Together? Together. They descended to the village square hand in hand, a deliberate choice that made several sect members shift nervously. Whatever Zhao Ming had expected, the sight of his targets presenting a united front clearly wasn't part of his plan. "Ah, our honored guests!" Zhao Ming's eyes glittered with something that might have been amusement or hunger. "How fortunate that you're both here. It'll make the ritual so much more efficient." "What ritual?" Wei Liang asked. Though he already knew. "A simple consecration, as I explained, to your charming village elder. You and Messer Shen will stand at the center of an array, offer your spiritual energy to balance the land's forces, and ensure prosperity for all. Surely 2 heroes of your caliber wouldn't refuse such a reasonable request." "And if we refuse?" Zhao Ming's expression didn't change, but the temperature around them seemed to drop several degrees. "Then I fear this village will suffer the same spiritual corruption that has claimed so many others in recent years. The same corruption that claimed Lotus Village 20 years ago." The name hit like a physical blow. Elder Chan gasped, his face going white as he finally understood what they were dealing with. "You remember Lotus Village, don't you, young masters?" Zhao Ming stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "Such a tragic loss. All those families, all those children, except for 2 little boys who were fortunate enough to be rescued. Raised by different sects, trained in different arts, kept apart for their own protection. Of course, even the most careful protections can fail. Accidents happen. The kind cultivators who raised those boys might find themselves facing unexpected difficulties, old enemies perhaps, or simple misfortune. He's threatening our masters, the people who saved us, raised us, loved us. How do we know you'll keep your word?" Wei Liang asked. "How do we know the ritual will actually do what you claim?" "You don't." Zhao Ming's honesty was chilling than any lie. "But you do know what will happen if you refuse. This village will burn. Your masters will die. Every person you've ever cared about will suffer until you wish you'd simply agreed from the beginning." "There's a third option," Huan said quietly. "Oh, and what might that be?" "We kill you all right here, right now, and end this." Zhao Ming laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "With what army, young masters? You're outnumbered 300 to 2, surrounded, with innocent civilians in the line of fire. Even warriors of your caliber can't protect everyone while fighting for their lives." He's right, and they all knew it. In a straight fight, Wei Liang and Huan might take down dozens of opponents before falling, but the villagers would be slaughtered in the process. "However," Zhao Ming continued conversationally, "I'm not unreasonable. I'll give you until sunset to consider your options. Discuss it among yourselves, say your goodbyes, and when the sun touches the horizon, you'll give me your answer." He remounted his horse with theatrical flair. "Oh, and young masters, don't even think about fleeing. My people have standing orders regarding the villages that harbor fugitives. It would be unfortunate." As the Crimson Blade sect withdrew to their perimeter positions, Wei Liang and Huan stood in the center of a village that had become a trap. 6 hours, Wei Liang said. 6 hours to figure out how to turn their own ritual against them. Elder Chen approached them, his weathered face etched with determination. "Masters, there's something else my grandfather's records mention. Something about the original area beneath Lotus Village." "What about it?" "It was never destroyed. After the massacre, the spiritual energy just went dormant. But if someone were to reactivate it with the right kind of power input, It could interfere with their new ritual, Wei Liang said, hope flickering in his chest. More than interfere, Huan said slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. If we can link the two air rays, synchronize them instead of letting them work in opposition, we turn their weapon into our weapon. But how do we get to Lotus Village? It's a half-day's ride and they'll never let us leave. Elder Chan smiled grimly. Who said anything about Li Heng? Masters, why do you think this village is called Willow Creek? Where do you think the water in our wells comes from? The underground river system, Wei Liang stared at him. It connects to the Lotus Village watershed. And spiritual energy follows water like lightning follows metal. If you can establish a connection here, channel your power through the water table, we can activate both air rays simultaneously from a distance. Huan squeezed Wei Liang's hand. It's insane. It's dangerous. It'll probably kill us both, but it might work. It might work. Wei Liang looked at the villagers who'd gathered to listen, men, women, children, who had welcomed him as a protector, who trusted him to find a solution to this impossible situation. Then he looked at Huan, seeing his own determination reflected in those pale winter eyes. Then let's get to work. Chapter 6. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of desperate preparation. While the Crimson Blade sect maintained a perimeter, assuming their trapped prey simply were delaying the inevitable, Wei Liang and Huan worked with the villagers to prepare their counterattack. Elder Chan's knowledge of the underground waterways proved invaluable. Beneath Willow Creek Village ran a network of natural caves and channels that connected to the greater watershed, including the spiritual springs that once fed Lotus Village's sacred pond. The water remembers, Elder Chan explained as we descended into the village's deepest well. Spiritual energy leaves traces in moving water like scent on the wind. If you can tap into those traces, follow them back to their source, we can establish a spiritual link across 20 miles of underground river. Horn tested the water with his fingertips. His ice cultivation sense is reading the flow patterns, but the power requirements would be enormous, more than either of us possesses alone. Then we'll have to do it together. They worked side by side in the cramped cave system, carving areas into stone walls while villagers provided light and supplies. Wei Liang's water-style techniques proved perfect for channeling the natural flow patterns, while Huan's ice cultivation allowed him to create focal points that would concentrate and direct their combined spiritual energy. Weiga, Huan said during a brief rest, there's something I need to tell you about the ritual they're planning. What about it? It's not just about harvesting our bloodline power. The Crimson Blade sect has been collecting spiritual energy from massacres for decades, building up a reservoir of death tanks of power. If they succeed here, if they complete the area they started at Lotus Village, they'll have enough energy to level mountains, to wipe out any sect that opposes them, any village that defies them. Wei Liang felt cold understanding settle in his bones. This isn't just about us. It's about giving them the power to reshape the entire martial world. Which is why we can't let them succeed, even if it means... I know, Wei Liang reached for Huan's hand, threading their fingers together. Huan, do you regret it? Any of it? Regret what? The 20 years apart, the different paths we walked, the fact that we only get this one day together before possibly dying. Huan was quiet for a long moment, considering. Do you know what I regret most? Not the separation, not the pain, not even the possibility of dying tonight. Then what? I regret that I wasted so much time being afraid. Afraid that you'd be disgusted by what I'd become. Afraid that the boy you loved was gone forever. Afraid that you choose your comfortable life over the dangerous mess I'd made of mine. Wei Liang smiled. And now? Now I know that the boy I loved grew up into a man I could fall in love with all over again. Now I know that comfort was never what you wanted. You wanted adventure, purpose, someone to share the journey with. I wanted you, Huan. I always wanted you. Their kiss was different this time, not desperate or frantic, but deep and certain and full of promise. The kind of kiss that said, whatever happens next, this moment is perfect. A polite cough from the cave entrance reminded them they weren't alone. Elder Chen stood there with an apologetic smile at an urgent expression. Masters, the sun is beginning to set. The sect's leader is calling for your answer. Wei Liang and Huan climbed back to the surface where the golden light of late afternoon painted everything in shades of ending. The villagers had gathered in the square again, but this time they stood differently,
not as helpless victims, but as people prepared to fight for their home. Zhao Ming waited in the center of the square, surrounded by his sect members, but somehow managing to look perfectly relaxed. Honored masters, I trust you reached the decision. We have, Wei Liang said, stepping forward with Wan at his side. Excellent. And that decision is? We'll participate in your ritual, but we have conditions. Zhao Ming raised an eyebrow. You're hardly in a position to negotiate, young master. Aren't we? You need us alive and cooperative for the ritual to work. Dead martyrs won't power your array. Wei Liang smiled. So yes, we have conditions. The villagers are relocated to safety before the ritual begins. Your people withdraw to the perimeter and remain there until it's complete. And we get to examine the ritual site beforehand to ensure it's safe. You don't trust me. Zhao Ming looked genuinely hurt by the implication. We don't trust anyone who massacres children and calls it spiritual necessity. For a moment, Zhao Ming's mask slipped, revealing something cold and reptilian beneath the human facade. Then his smile returned, bright and poisonous. Very well, your conditions are acceptable. The ritual will take place at midnight, appropriate timing for such a significant undertaking. My people will escort the villagers to a safe distance, and you may inspect the array to your heart's content. Too easy, Wei Liang thought. He's agreeing too readily. But they were committed now. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Wei Liang and Wan watched the villagers being herded away from their homes. Elder Chen caught Wei Liang's eye as he passed, giving a subtle nod that meant the preparations were complete. Second thoughts? Zhao Ming asked pleasantly. None, Wan replied. We keep our promises. How admirable. Such loyalty is rare in these corrupt times. If only you knew, Wei Liang thought, what promises we're really keeping. As full darkness fell over Willow Creek Village, the Crimson Blade sect began their preparations for a ritual 20 years in the making. Arrays carved into stone glowed with sickly red light, powered by the accumulated spiritual energy of dozens of massacres. But beneath their feet, hidden in the network of caves and waterways that connected this place to the ruins of Lotus Village, a different kind of preparation was reaching completion. Arrays carved in flowing patterns that mimic water and ice, designed not to harvest power, but to redirect it. At the stroke of midnight, two young men would stand in the center of overlapping arrays, one built on death, one built on love, and the martial world would discover which foundation was stronger. Are you ready? Wei Liang asked as they walked toward the ritual site. I've been ready for 20 years, Wan replied, squeezing his hand. Let's finish this. Together, these stepped into the light of the crimson array and began the final chapter of a promise made beside a lotus pond when the world was young and full of possibilities. The ritual of hearts was about to begin. 3 months later, Wei Liang woke up to sunlight streaming through paper windows and the sound of Huan humming in the kitchen. For a moment, he lay still, savoring the simple miracle of waking up next to the man he loved in a world that hadn't ended. The ritual had worked. Barely. When they synchronized their spiritual energy and channeled it through the underground waterways, the feedback loop had overloaded both arrays simultaneously. The explosion had been visible from 3 provinces away, and the crater where the Crimson Blade sect's main array had stood was already becoming a lake. Zhao Ming and most of his followers hadn't survived the backlash. Those that had were either dead from spiritual deviation or permanently stripped of cultivation. Fitting justice for men who had built their power on stolen life force.
Appreciate you watching. Hit subscribe, like, and share. See you in the next story.